Good day, my name is Joshua and today we're going to discuss about anemia, its type and causes. I hope at the end of this video, you guys can understand what is anemia and differentiate it by its type. So let's start. Before we start, let's talk about red blood cell first. The red blood cell carry the oxygen to the body tissue via the circulatory system. The RBC are perfectly designed to perform this oxygen-carrying function. In this lesson, you will learn that what makes your RBC so good at their job. You will also discover what happens when the oxygen-carrying ability of the red blood cell is compromised, like this. The reason why the matured RBC are so good in carrying oxygen, it is because they made a room by eliminating their nucleus. That's right, immature RBC has a nucleus that allows it to reproduce, but when it gets matured, the nucleus disappears, making it more room for our hemoglobin. Hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is an oxygen-carrying pigment of red blood cells. Take a note that hemoglobin comes from hemo means blood and globulin means protein. Hemoglobin is an iron-containing molecule that is responsible for transporting the bulk of oxygen through your blood. The hemoglobin is bound to oxygen that gives our blood its bright red color. Even though our red blood cells are many, the hemoglobin that carries that determine how efficiently the oxygen was circulate through your body. The more hemoglobin molecule found within your RBC, the more oxygen that will become able to transport. The decrease in oxygen carrying the ability of the blood result in a condition called anemia. Anemia. Anemia is due to a decrease of number of RBC or a decrease of amount of hemoglobin. Remember the prefix anemia. An without or lacking, and emia means to blood. Literally means without or lack of blood. There are few things that can cause or decrease of number of RBC. One way seems to be the most obvious is mass loss of blood or called hemorrhage. From hemorrhage, we have hemorrhagic anemia. Hemorrhage anemia is due to an excessive loss of red blood cell through bleeding. This blood loss may be caused by a wound, but it also can be a result of something going on internally such as stomach ulcer or heavy menstruational bleeding. Blood cells do not have to be cause of anemia. Sometimes they have a problem in their production. Talking about the production, we're talking about bone marrow. The bone marrows are where the red blood cells are formed. The bone marrow is the connective tissues that fills the cavity of the bones and the chief site of the RBC formation. A destruction or inhibition of red bone marrow result in aplastic anemia. Aplastic anemia. Aplastic anemia is defined as a disorder in which the bone marrow fails to make blood. Take a note that aplastic anemia came from the word aplastic, means failure to develop. Therefore, it is an anemia due to a failure of blood cells to develop. Aplastic anemia is a serious condition in which can develop at any age. Causes might be known as or could result from radiation or chemotherapy, treatment or exposure to toxins, and medications. Pernicious anemia. Pernicious anemia is another type of anemia that involves in a decrease of production of the red blood cells. But unlike the aplastic anemia that involves in the bone marrow, pernicious anemia involves in the absorption of vitamin B12. That's why we define pernicious anemia as a disorder in which the body cannot make enough red blood cells because the intestine cannot properly absorb the vitamin B12. The vitamin B12 is needed for the production of the red blood cells. We find nutrients of vitamin B12 in our foods that we eat such as the meat, poultry, milk, and eggs. People that suffer from pernicious anemia can't absorb enough vitamin B12 because they are lack of intrinsic factor. When we're talking about pernicious anemia, we're talking about intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is a special protein made in our stomach that helps our intestine to absorb vitamin B12. When your stomach does not make enough intrinsic factor, the intestine cannot properly absorb vitamin B12. Note, pernicious from pernicious anemia means deadly. Even though nowadays that pernicious anemia is easily to treat, but when it first discovered, this form of anemia will often result to death. Anemia can also be a result from a genetic disorder, which case is called the sickle cell anemia. It occurs almost exclusively in the black people of the Africa. Sickle cell anemia is a severe hereditary form of anemia in which the red blood cells are sickled in shape due to the abnormality in their hemoglobin. Normally, the red blood cells are round and flexible that helps them to squeeze through the tight capillaries without getting stuck. But in cases of the sickle cell anemia, the red blood cells became sickle in shapes and became abnormally. That makes them more likely to get stuck in the blood vessels, causes the blockage, and can result to a severe pain or organ damage. In addition, the sickle-shaped cells only circulates the body for about 10 to 20 days instead of typical 120 days. The body cannot make enough RBC to keep up with this pace in this rapid turnover, and so the result is anemia. Hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is an oxygen-carrying pigment of the red blood cells. If there's a decrease of amount of red blood cells or hemoglobin, it can cause a decrease of oxygen-carrying ability of the blood, in which condition it is called anemia. One way you can lose red blood cells is through massive loss of blood, or hemorrhage, and it's called the hemorrhagic anemia. But not all anemia is caused or due to heavy bleeding. Some anemia is due to the production of the red blood cells, which is called the aplastic anemia, which is a disorder in which the bone marrow fails to make enough blood. The next anemia is a failure to make enough blood, but due to the disorder in which the body cannot make enough red blood cells because the intestine cannot properly absorb vitamin B12. The pernicious anemia is accompanied by E intrinsic factor, which is a special protein made in the stomach that helps your intestine to absorb vitamin B12. The last anemia is called the sickle cell anemia, which is a disorder condition, a severe hereditary form of anemia in which the red blood cells are sickled in shape due to abnormality in their hemoglobin. And that's it, guys. That's the end of anemia. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and learned something from it. Again, I am Joshua Kier. Thank you for watching.